Good morning. Welcome to another installment of our virtual seminar Grove. We are very excited. My name is Michael Barr. I'm the education director here at the Utah Shakespeare Festival, and I am joined by our artistic director, Brian Vaughn. And I want to do a little thank you to our sponsors. We're grateful to the Cedar City and Bryan Head Tourism Bureau for making these possible. And today we're going to talk about a topic which we're a little nervous about, but we've got some great authority here to help us through this topic. Brian, what are we talking about today?
Yes, hi. Thank you, Michael. Yes, my name is Brian Vaughn, Artistic Director, and today we are going to basically be kind of examining Taming of the Shrew, William Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew, and specifically the role of Kate and how that role has sort of evolved over time, and essentially some of the challenges with producing Taming of the Shrew during our current climate in the world. One of the things I find really unique about the play is that we produced this play here at the Utah Shakespeare Festival 10 times over our 60 years, which I find really miraculous. Taming of the Shrew and A Midsummer Night's Dream are the two most produced plays we've had here at the festival. The festival opened with Taming of the Shrew, and it's been something that we have a huge fan base. People love seeing it. They love enjoying it. But the play has hurdles. It has problems, and it has things that you have to dissect, and you have to sort of come with your own opinion about it. So, and especially with the role of Kate and sort of the male-female relationship in the play and what that means, especially in our world right now. So we are joined today with two lovely human beings. I'm so grateful that they are here today. We're joined with Shelly Gaza, who is here from Colorado. She's currently on the faculty at University of Northern Colorado and has been at the festival many seasons. I'll let her introduce herself, but she's essentially has some background with this play in multiple iterations, which is fabulous. We're also joined center court by Leslie Brott, who I believe is currently in California, but is also on the faculty at Utah State University in Logan. I think the Wimbledon background is actually apropos for our conversation today and the back and forth, and the battle of the sexes that happen in Taming the Shrew. Leslie has been a familiar face, I know, for many festival audiences, has been here many seasons, and first off, and has played the role of Kate in a very popular production here that we did in 2004, 8?
Mm-hmm. 2004.
Four, yes. So I wanted to hear their perspective on the role, and both from an actor's perspective as well as a director's perspective. Shelly, I know, has directed the play. And I'm really grateful that you're both here. Thank you. What I love about this is, in tackling Shakespeare a lot of the times is, I don't know if I have the answers to this. I don't know. You have to just sort of present the play and let the play land and be what it is. And but when you're inside it, you have to solve all the things that are there. First off, I want to lead out by saying, Shelly, what's your history of the festival? When you first worked here, how long you've been here, and all of that. And same with Leslie afterward. And then also your first relationship with this play. If you could just sort of give me your first experience with the play.
Sure. So hi, thanks for having me today. It's great to talk to you all about this. And so my first season at Utah Shakespeare Festival was 2004. And then in 2005, I was Kate in the touring production of Taming of the Shrew, which Michael Barr directed. It was great being directed by him. I had a good time with that play. Then in 2014, I directed the school tour of Taming of the Shrew. And then in 2017, so just 3 years ago, I played Kate again at the Colorado Shakespeare Festival in their main stage season. So I have come around the horn a few times with this play. So there's sort of the arc of what I've done with this particular play. I'm pretty sure that the first time I saw Taming of the Shrew as a performance was Leslie's production in 2004, which was my first season at Utah Shakes. And of course, we see all of the plays all summer, and I adored that production. I did. I remember it very vividly. And I do think, although I was aware of the play and had I think studied it as a college student or something. I don't think I had seen it before that production in 2004. So I would say that experience, seeing that production, definitely shaped how I approached it as Kate the following year. I know for sure that I learned from watching Leslie do the role and used a lot of that as I, did my journey with Kate. I don't have much memory of it before that, though. So I hadn't studied it academically that I know. Like I said, I'm sure it came up in some, college class or something, but I don't have a particular memory of it before that 2004 production. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I guess that's sort of, to answer your question, Brian, that's sort of my relationship with Utah Shakespeare Festival, where it goes back to starting in 2004. And then those are my pivotal sort of 4 moments with the play. First seeing Leslie's production, well, I'll call it Leslie's production because she's on the and then played the role, directed the show, and played the role again. So
excellent. Awesome. Leslie?
Hi, thank you for having me. It's nice. It's really nice to see all of you, actually. Okay, Taming of the Shrew. I, as we know, I did it in 2004, and then about 4 years later, I vocal and text coached it for the Great River Shakespeare Festival. So those are my 2 production moments with it. But I first saw the play in, not everybody will know this, but the theater geeks will. I saw the legendary Bill Ball production down at the American Conservatory Theater, which was filmed, I think, for American Playhouse, mm-hmm. is still available on tape. And it's the great Commedia production that they spent 2 years developing at the American Conservatory Theater. And they loaded us all up into school buses and drove us down to San Francisco from where I live in Northern California. And we got to see a matinee with Freddie Olster, who mm-hmm. has worked at the festival, in this legendary production that was remounted 3 consecutive years, and I think another additional year, and of course filmed, and very famous. And so that was my first encounter with the play, and it was so much fun. It was so physical and required so much technical prowess on the part of all of the members of the company. There were sound effects, there were props, there was so much physicality, and the theater was filled with high school students from all over Northern California who had been bussed in to see this performance, as well as plenty of patrons from the ACT subscription audience. And so that was my first encounter with it, was in, I think, oh my God, I don't want to date myself, but I think 1974, 75. And it was a raucous afternoon in the theater, filled with joy and excitement.
Yeah, that's great. My first experience with the play was with that production, the Bill Ball ACT production. Mm-hmm. I remember seeing it in high school. My high school did a 1-act version of Taming of the Shrew, and we had our own like little mini Shakespeare Festival in my senior year, and we had a 1-act of Shrew, and then we did a full production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. And but I remember seeing that, and that was a very, very pivotal moment for me when I saw it. It was really, I think, the thing that launched me into wanting to be an actor, because it was so much fun and so unique. The commedia aspects of it, how they infused commedia dell'arte and sound effects, and the broad sweep of it, but also the physicality of it was just unlike anything I'd ever seen. And Freddie Olster, who you mentioned, playing Kate with Mark Singer, the Beastmaster, playing Petruchio. They were just such great foes too, and like they really equals. And I was so taken with her performance in that. And I remember when we did Charlie's On here in 1997, and she played Donna Lucia de Alvadores and was playing Fancourt Beverly, and I was starstruck when I met her the first time. I said, you know, you have no idea what the impact of that performance was on me as a young theater artist. And that does sort of go into, I think, my first question. Well, actually, I want to know from Michael too, because I played Petruchio in my high school one act of Taming Shrew as an 18-year-old strutting Petruchio. And it was very physical, and we essentially just kind of basically stole a lot of the physicality that was happening in there because we didn't know any better, and it was, you know, 1980, whatever. And then later ended up playing it here at the festival in 2015, directed by Fred Adams, who obviously has directed it previous, and it was the last time I worked with him as a director. And it was the final performance on the Adams stage before we moved over to our new venue. So those are the two experiences I've had with the play. I've not directed it. I've only actually done one professional production of it, seen multiple productions of it. That's my background. Michael, I know, has directed it numerous times, right? Michael, what's your experience with it?
I'll just be quick. Yeah, directed it numerous times for our touring production. I actually, when I was 17 years old, won a scholarship to Southern Utah University playing the world's smallest Petruchio. I am small of stature. Had a beautiful, wonderful, shorter than me Spitfire actress that played Kate. It was the Goodmorrow Kate, for That's That Your Name I Hear. So yeah, that was my first initial, and I think this is a good way for us to launch into your next question, Brian, because we have these wonderful experiences with it, but it was really important. I remember my director in high school saying this. He wanted to make sure that that was not just a, quote, combat scene. You know, these people respect each other and love each other. And I remember as a young actor looking, because I had seen the Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, I had seen all of those things. So I credit my high school teacher saying, why do they like each other? What do they need from each other? How can you find in the text of their love for each other? And I remember that. And that moment, that seed kind of fused other things as I approached it later on. So why don't we go with your next question there, Brian?
Yeah, well, I mean, I am really interested in this idea because I think, and tell me if you've experienced the same thing. Like, I was so eager to do the play the first time I did it, and because it was so fun, you know, and you kind of get this thing. But then when you get inside it, you go, oh, there's some clunky stuff here, and how this lands. And if you misinterpret something, it can lean one way versus another way. And I would love to just talk about that a little bit, especially from the role of Kate, and you know, the level of subjugation that happens with her in the course of the play. Something that's like, well, I don't know if that's really the message we want to be promoting. You know, it can be completely misinterpreted. But when you played it for the first time, did you have some of those queries where you're like, how do I live up to the play, but also kind of thread in this other thing that is actually about her empowering her and holding on to her strength and all of that? I mean, what was that like for you inside it when you began to work on it, Shelly?
Yeah, I would say that, and I've thought a lot about this in the last week as we've, decided we're going to do this. And so it's been on my mind a lot this week. I really think that the first time I did it, I was not aware necessarily of, or I didn't bring that to it. I was really excited. And I think, and Leslie and I have talked about this, I was really excited to be playing a leading lady at the Utah Shakespeare Festival, because those roles and those opportunities are so much fewer for us women who have chosen paths in the, in professional Shakespeare world. And so I will admit that, at this early point in my career, I was so excited and thrilled and nervous and all of the things that go with what I saw as a really important step in my career. And so I admit to that over the 15 years ensuing, so much about what I have learned as being a woman in this industry, my experience with that has absolutely informed and changed from how I felt approaching it in 2017, night and day. So part of that, I think, has to do with not necessarily because those weren't important topics in my life in 2005, but because the realities of being a woman trying to make a living in professional Shakespeare festivals and those opportunities being few and far between, so there was all of that. And it's very, and Leslie and I have had a conversation about this, that, that I will admit that when in 2017, when I received the offer for the contract to do this, and it included 3 roles that summer when I did Kate again. It was Kate, Calpurnia, and Julius Caesar, and Warwick in Henry VI Part 3, Henry VI Part 3. And if it weren't for for the Warwick role, I don't know if I would have accepted the contract, because I don't know that in 2017, I was interested in doing Kate at that point. I had already turned a corner on this play, not sure if it was a play I wanted to explore. But again, as a woman, and that was a contract on the table, and I really wanted to work with that company, and I really wanted to work on Shakespeare. And so I suppose I just say that's the journey that I've gone through, the bookend of playing the role. Leslie, did you, when you, in 2004,
yeah, what was it like for you, Leslie, as far as
Well, okay, it was 16 years ago. My hair was white then too. I was a lot like you, Shelly. I was thrilled to be able to do a leading Shakespeare role, because I was never really ingenue material. So if there's anything for leading ladies, character gals, Kate would be it. And I was 40, and everybody can do the math now. And so I really had thought it had passed me by, and I was thrilled that I was going to get to do it with my great friend Michael Connolly, and I was going to get to do it with Henry Warrenitz as the director, and I knew that they weren't going to let me down as far as representing a woman in this show in 2004. I knew that I was in good hands. I knew that, with my Petruchio and with my director. But I'll tell you, it's just being a woman at a Shakespeare festival is a great achievement. And it's a wonderful validation to be rehired at the Shakespeare Festival, at least as far as my contributions artistically. And so I didn't want to say no. I want the work. But women are only 16% of the roles in the entire canon, and very few of those roles are substantial. And so, sure, you bet I wanted to do it. What actor doesn't want to get out there and solve the problems? And then you're confronted with that. I mean, I had great appetite to solve the problems of the play, or the role, I guess I should say, in a way that I found palatable, and that didn't reinforce the tropes that women are property, second-class citizens. And it's very difficult with this play, because there is not a lot in the text to give Kate authority and authority over her choices and how this relationship is going to work. And so we had to do it very carefully, the director and Petruchio and I, to make this work, and for the director to skew the entire production, towards comedy, towards people's foibles, faults, their egos. And so I felt like Henry did a really good job with that, but I am responsible for selecting plays. I'm not the sole person who's responsible for selecting plays in the season at my university. And I just directed a Shakespeare at school. And I will tell you, Shrew never even entered my mind as something that I wanted to put out there for my young ladies. We did Pericles, and I felt like that offered a lot more room for women to explore roles of power and agency.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, it's one of the running a Shakespeare festival, and it's like, you got 38 plays that we sort of link to him, and you do them over time, and
Yeah.
there's this thing. And in many ways, there is this conversation that's out in our world where people are like, no, you shouldn't do that play anymore. That and The Merchant of Venice are two of the plays that rise to the crop where people are like, no, he was exploring things in there that just are not relatable in our current world, our current climate. Well, as a leader of a Shakespeare festival, I see them in many ways and going, here's what this was.
Yeah.
Show what this is, and let's have a conversation about what this is and how that may not resonate to where we are now. And it's the only place I can kind of put my brain, because we're the Shakespeare festival. You know what I mean? There are obviously, the other thing, that I always think of with Shrew also is it's an early Shakespeare play. And there's also a prologue that is some type of framing device in this play that is often cut with Christopher Sly and this drunken lout who they basically dress him up and make him pretend he's a lord. And then they present this play, for him. So that framing device is often cut, but it does represent, and there are other iterations obviously and adaptations, and The Tamer Tamed and Shrew and all these things that sometimes people don't throw that stuff in the play and they just do Shrew better, because Shrew is actually, you want to get to it. The Sly stuff is hard. It's just like anachronistic and very challenging. You want to get to Shrew. But it does sort of set up this thing where I think conceptually a lot of people really kind of take it either one way or another. They make it very broad and kind of comedian, make them like archetypes, these caricatures, and sort of don't really lean into the humanity of them, or I should say it's more two-dimensional than three-dimensional. Or they go with the framing device and all of that. Lately, we're seeing productions where we're swapping gender, where all the female actresses are beginning to play the male roles in the play, and male actors are playing the female actors in the play, or they're keeping the gender fluidity open in the play, which I think is really fascinating too, because it does kind of just flip the tables a little bit and kind of go, well, look at it now. Look at this play now under this lens here, which is like, yeah. And I even remember working on it where I was like, there are things that are just hard to sort of work on. And I kept leaning into this idea that there's like these other characters around Kate and Petruchio who are actually more problematic than the two of them in many ways, because her father is sort of in many ways selling her out to pasture and like trying to find a suitor for her. Everything is wager driven. It's all about a bet, a gambling bet. And the play it begins and it ends in that way. Let me find a suitable suitor for my daughter. I won't marry my younger daughter until the older one is wed. Let's find somebody. Let's make a wager. Let's come together. It has nothing to do with their relationship at all, them connecting as human beings. It's just about, let me just, put my daughter in the hands of someone else. And it ends in the play of them sort of saying, well, I'm going to make a wager on what it's like between a husband and wife, and this sort of thing about duty, and I've always found that framework is actually really interesting to me with Petruchio too, because there is this thing where it's like, who is actually the Shrew in the play? Petruchio is not a great guy. I mean, he's a braggart, and his father has passed away, and he's looking for land, and he's looking for opportunity, and he's coming from it in a place that is really not about people connecting. And I do think over the play, there is this kind of connection, but in Petruchio's actions, he just does it the wrong way. He just does it the wrong way. And I think that's, you have to kind of embrace the tricky stuff.
Yeah. And when I directed it, so I had come back to it almost 10 years later when I directed it, and I wanted it to be, my director's through line was that these were two imperfect people that were going to find their way to happiness, and that the compromise of figuring out how to be partners, how to have a partnership. So that was my drive. That was my, that was my through line through the play. I was a little lucky because doing the education, scenario, we cut it to pieces, right? We had to bring it down to 75 minutes. So you can be really liberal with just trimming all the stuff that, So the thing about it though, I kept wanting it to be that. But you've got to cut a lot to make that even possible. And what you're left with is maybe 70 or 75 minutes that might support that through line. And then my sort of the frustration and really angst about it for me when I came back to it in 2017, playing Kate again, I wanted it to be that again. And I had a fantastic Petruchio, Scott Coopwood. You all know Scott. He's been a member at, he's been at USF before. And Christopher Duvall was our director, and we were a great team, and they were totally supportive that that's what we were trying to find. But it's not there. I mean, it's not there on the page. The words aren't there to support that, really. And so as Kate, and it's especially not there for Kate because Kate says way less than Petruchio does. Petruchio says 4 times as much as Kate does. So as Kate, I'm over here in the corner trying to emote through this, show my, whatever through this, all of this stuff without having words to support the story that I'm wanting to tell and wanting to be there. And I ended up at the end of that season in 2017, really realizing that the there's not there. And so it really does highlight the question for me, what I, for 15 years, really wanted the story to be, the story that would be satisfying for me, to really embrace that, yeah, it can be about 2 craggy people finding love together. I can get on board with that story. I can get on board with 2 imperfect people coming together. But the story arc, the words for Kate aren't there. And we have to do a lot of inventing to get there. And we've got to do some cutting of some cringy stuff to get there. And even in 2017, we cut some lines that I just couldn't say. It just wouldn't work for me. And I had an artistic team and an artistic director and a producer that were totally on board with that. I felt totally supported every step of the way on that. But that's a really deep question for me. At what point do you look at it and say, I've cut so much of this, why are we doing it?
Yeah.
And I don't know. And I don't mean that to be like conversation ender. So therefore we don't do it. I don't mean that, but that's the big question mark that the last time I did this play, I really was left with.
Leslie?
And I don't know what to answer for.
Yeah, Leslie, go ahead.
Yeah, I got to agree with everything Shelly says, because it's exhausting when you play Kate, because you must give all of this attention and then without making faces, absolutely react in a way that the audience sees you think and react to and process how this relationship with Petruchio and everybody else in the play is going to work. And I was lucky. We did the framing device, and Henry wrote an epilogue that took pieces of the play and put them back together. So for us, the framing device was really about a couple that it wasn't, necessarily a universal political statement. I mean, I think all theater is political, but this was a story about intimacy, about the responsibility in relationship, about the way we need to compromise in order to work with each other. And so Petruchio in our production, I feel like Henry and Michael skewed it. So Petruchio was softened just as much as Kate was and made aware of his failings as a character, but it was easier for Michael to do it because he had so much more to say. And so it's very difficult. And when we were working on the scenes in the latter part of the play, like the return scene when you're coming back to see the family, and it's the sun and the moon scene, and then of course the big final speech, those were all about really intimate moments between just Kate and Petruchio, and the bargaining of, okay, I'll try this your way, or okay, I will see if this is fun. So it wasn't about capitulation, it was about negotiation. And even the final big speech was about negotiation. And I felt like we were successful because Michael's interpretation of Petruchio admired my Kate so much. And he also changed significantly from complete jerk to someone that appreciated, it was surprised by how much he could appreciate women, but it is not in the text. It's not in the text.
I remember when we were working on it in 2015, because I mean, I had this same thing where it's like, it always comes down to that the wedding, you know, you leave the wedding, that's a show. That's more, I think, for the people around them, about Petruchio doing all this stuff and kind of keeping her off guard. But when they get to his house, and then it's like, he basically keeps her up all night, starves her, essentially. That's what people come down to. And to sort of, and that was something for me that I was like, I just, you know, and I remember this line that always stuck out to me. She ate no meat, in the soliloquy afterward. She ate no meat today, nor none shall eat. And I kept leaning in this, like, nor none shall eat, meaning I'm not going to do that either. I'm going to do the same thing to myself that is happening to her. But no matter how many times I was putting that out there, it was like, I have no idea if that's resonating, because the reality is it still happens. He's still going down that avenue to make that happen. And it is really tricky. I know other Petruchios that I talk to, you know, elevated things to me like, well, he actually never says anything negative about Kate. He never, like, it's always about like love and trying to uplift her. And in many ways, it seemed my intuit was going, don't be angry. Don't be angry. Don't play the role that everybody around you is wanting you to play, which is this shrewish, you know, horrible woman who doesn't agree with anything. Don't be angry. Go the other direction. Play the opposite of the expectation. And so gradually through the course of the play, there's this thing that, you know, there becomes that battle of wit that we see so beautifully in the wooing scene that sometimes manifests itself physically, but that's a battle of wit, really. That you see that again happening later with the sun and the moon, and there kind of becomes this sort of dance of like, oh, these are two people who are really, really smart, and also like strong-willed people. And you know, her coming out at the end after the wedding between all of them, and the sort of the wager that the widow puts out there, saying, you are going to be a shrew, basically, you are what you are. She kind of throws that back at Kate and Petruchio, and then Kate sort of throws this thing in there about, you know, fie, and that thy scornful brow and all that, which is like the hardest, you know, speech in Shakespeare, because you don't know if she's being sincere of saying, lay your hand under her foot, or is that a ruse to sort of say, I'm going to play this thing to adjust all the opinions around me, when underneath that is the understanding between Kate and Petruchio that she actually isn't that, but they're equals by that point, not.
So that's what I would love to, because for me, and I still remember, I mean, we spent a lot of, every production I ever directed, that's where she finally gets a chance to speak. And then, so what do you do with that? Shelly, Leslie?
Yeah, I mean, that was my question. Like how that speech becomes the defining moment about how you play that moment. Is that a sincere thing? What is underneath that? When they say things like Shakespeare sometimes doesn't have subtext, I'm like, well, I don't know. There's maybe a lot of subtext going on.
Yeah. So,
you know,
and there's all sorts of things that people do to trick that. But when you take that at face value, so how did you approach that in your multiple productions and as you've worked with this show? What do you do with that final monologue?
Well, it all depends on everything else that comes before that.
Right.
And I remember when Henry and Michael and I were working on this, and it was really important to Henry, the director, that, and to me too, to give Kate some agency and some power. And part of that for me was she has to be as awful as they say she is. And with plenty of good reasons to be that awful, because she's like a prize cow that for some reason nobody wants to buy, even though she's worth millions of dollars, right? I mean, that's the only thing that gives her agency is her money. But her dad's trying to get rid of her. Someone else take her. And and it's not private, it's public. Everybody in town knows it. And so that motivated me to be even more awful, to be publicly humiliated over and over and over again. And then to finally meet a guy that I might think would be smart enough to even give the time of day to, which is the Petruchio character. You know, it's a wonderful meeting, battle of wits. But it's still public. It's still in a public place, and he treats her with all the tropes that men use for wooing women, and she knows he's just there for the money. I mean, he needs to be just as surprised too. So part of the balancing act was to have her be as powerfully awful as she was, that everybody was afraid of her, that was the only way she had agency. And so that was how she went after it, because she didn't have Bianca's good looks and charm. So I think the capitulation for me, or the moment where my character was said to Petruchio, all right, I'll do it your way, was the sun and the moon. And then the sun and the moon scene actually turning out to be fun and having a good time, and having Petruchio admire Kate for her creativity, then moves into the final scene. And so the final speech for me, the big speech, was all about negotiating. She does say, I am ashamed that women are so simple, right? But she's talking about herself, to say, the only way I felt like I had agency was to be aggressive, to be horrible, to at least say, you have to look at me if I'm this awful. And then to negotiate okay, if I am going to be these things, if I'm going to do these things, then these are the things that you have to do. And you have to provide me with all of the entire list that she goes through about a safe and secure place to live, comfort, intimacy, a life of the mind, that you are required to have a relationship with me and work at it. And that, I do think, is there in the text if you play it as a negotiation. And that Petruchio gives you the yes or no, and it's just about the two of you in that scene where everybody else is watching. Once again, everything is being negotiated in public. And so that's how I made it palatable. But oh boy, I don't think I would have been able to do it without the director that I had, and without the Petruchio that I had, and without the entire, the play was hilarious. Chuck Metten I keep thinking about him, about how funny he was, and Bob Anderson, and there was a spirit of love and reconciliation, and people having their consciousness raised about their own foibles in the play. And so that made it possible. But, it is what it is. It's on the page, it's pretty misogynistic.
I want to remind those that are watching online, we're going to be opening it up for questions in a bit. There's a beautiful conversation that's happening over there right now. We're spawning a lot of talk. Well done. But we'd love to hear some questions too, which we'll get to shortly. I want Shelly to get a chance to talk about that speech. That speech.
Yeah.
Things you got to do.
The thing about the speech is, some of it is I mean, there are a few lines that are some of my most favorite in the whole canon. I mean, there really are some beautiful lines about, Leslie, what you're saying about intimacy and security and the things that we seek in domestic partnership. Like that's, and then there are also some lines that I'm pretty sure we cut, Michael. I was trying to find, I couldn't find our script, but I think we did.
Yeah, that's the one I hate. Are you talking about, let me place your hand beneath your foot?
Well, actually, no. Actually, I was, and so I prepped it because I wanted to make sure I remembered exactly what the words were before we,
Yeah.
Here are the words that I know that we cut in the production that I directed, and we also cut in the production that I did in 2017. Here's where it gets really hard for me. Such duty as the subject owes the prince, even such a woman oweth to her husband. And then also this one, why are our bodies soft and weak and smooth? Because weak, Kate has not been, and the way we played it, Kate wasn't weak for an instant, so that just didn't resonate. We weren't playing, so that word just didn't work for us. Unapt to toil and trouble in the world, but that our soft conditions and our hearts should well agree with our external parts. Doesn't work for me. Doesn't work. That's not partnership. That's not the truth about women. That's not the truth about Kate. So those we couldn't square them. So I didn't say them. I didn't say them in 2017. I don't think I said them in 2005, but I can't remember exactly. Now, when it comes to the hand beneath the foot, though, this is like what you're saying, Leslie. It only works in the playing of it for me. And so when we played it in 2017, Scott and I, my trucchio, there was no, I kneeled and I put my hand there. And then I've seen this is not a new idea. He takes my hands and raises me up and we hold hands. So that's not a new, I've seen that played before.
Yeah.
The difference for me was, I wasn't surprised when that happened. It wasn't like I'm giving over to him and he took my hand. I gave my hand under his foot knowing darn well he was not going to put his foot on my hand because we had built the trust over the relationship of the 2 hours of the play. I knew that he was going to take my hand and I was showing my trust in the development of our relationship. And so when that moment happens, and that was important for me as an actor to negotiate that particular part of the speech in the play and not to play into what I thought would have been a trope of, I've learned to be trusting and submissive and, oh, he's going to rise to the occasion and be better and take, like that wasn't interesting to me. So I really actually loved that moment. It's a moment of trust and intimacy, but he had already gotten there. And because of the sun and the moon scene, because of the now and come and kiss me, Kate, the way that we negotiated that part, Petruchio and I knew, like we knew how that moment was going to end. So that's sort of that speech, yeah.
No, I think that's really great too, because the public-private element of that scene is also something in the play that there's people watching them say this stuff, her say this, their negotiation. There's this and in many ways, well, and then the play ends. This is the other thing. I'm like, it's like as though everybody in the room is just, jaws on the floor, speechless. They're not, because the last time they saw was her throwing stuff, her mad at her sister, all the stuff that they've categorized as like, oh my gosh, she's just intolerable. And there's this complete other shift. But I've always felt what's happening underneath that whole speech is actually not, it's all like, let me play this thing for these people over here. But underneath is this sort of thing about you have to be with me here, And I always find it interesting. He's like, you have won the wager, but I have hit the white, is one of Petruchio's last lines where he's like, you might have won that thing, but I gained the real prize here, which is not money, is not that. I don't care about the bet anymore because we have each other going, riding off into the sunset, the two of them together. I also feel like there's also this kind of like the schools of improv are this sense of like, don't deny, don't hit an opposing force with a wall. You know, it's like, there's a game play acting thing that I think Petruchia is also, I'm going to play this thing for all the other people and see if she'll go along. And she doesn't go along. She doesn't go along. She doesn't go along. She doesn't. And it's just like, and then finally there's the place is like, look, whether I do what I say, what I am, you're still crossing it. And then there's this kind of recognition that it's like, oh, this isn't about, he doesn't like me or he's subjectifying me. It's all about like, no, there's this thing about trying to hold on to the power through not subscribing to being what all these other people want you to be. You know, it seems to me in many ways this underbelly thing between the two of them, this understanding. But it's so hard, even if you play that, even if you do that, to make that stuff resonate, because it's not, as you indicated, not on the page. It's not formulated out there, not written a little scene where the two of them are like, I'm sorry, I shouldn't, you know? And it's tricky. It's hard, you know? One of these questions I want to mention this question. I think it's kind of interesting, actually. This is from Sarah, who says, do you think we are more uncomfortable having very imperfect characters in a comedy than in a tragedy? This is a 3-part question, actually. So that's the first question. Do you think we are more uncomfortable having very imperfect characters in a comedy than in a tragedy? That's up for grabs. Anybody wants that?
I don't know. I've never thought of that question before. I think I understand where she's coming from, that in tragedies we're used to, we know, you know, the tragic flaw is the reason that the tragedy exists. And so we go into it knowing that, you know, the character is flawed and that's why we're telling the story. Is that different? Are we more uncomfortable with it in comedies? I mean, I guess, I don't know, just thinking about it in 5 seconds. Yeah, maybe, because we go to comedy we go to comedy to have fun, to laugh, and so if we have to grapple too much with, I'm laughing at that, should I be laughing at that? I'm laughing at that. What does that say about me? Yeah, that's a really uncomfortable, you know, place to sit as an audience member.
We kind of touched on last week too, the idea that like some of them, they were termed comedies, but they were also like plays, you know what I mean? That we've later termed them as comedies. And, you know, I think of a play like Measure for Measure, which is another one where you're like, I don't know how funny this really is, you know? And there's also some more complex misogyny happening in that play and all of that. The other part of this question is, does the inherent humor make it harder to lean into the cringe? And then also, why do we feel the need to not show it as an abusive relationship? Is the question that came up there, which I think is interesting.
Well, I have to agree with Shelly about the comedy. You know, recently I saw a movie from the 80s that's a very famous comedy where a character came out in blackface, and I had never seen it before. And I said, oh my gosh, you know, I was absolutely horrified. And I'm grateful that that 30 years ago, maybe I wouldn't have thought that, but I am grateful. I think that now. And so the cringe, I think, is good for us. But I know that they did a production of this show in England. Was it last summer or the summer before? And Kate's spirit was broken. She was abused, and it was about male domination, and that can be there. You know, we do call these comedies, and I always say to my students when we're working on this, I say, well, it's a comedy because at the end, everybody's not dead, and there are marriages, but that doesn't mean that it's a gut buster all the way through. But and like Shelly, I agree that we expect people to behave not admirably when we go to a tragedy. And so, but at comedies, we do expect to laugh at people, at their reactions, but there is an element in my heart that welcomes the fact that we think, maybe that's just not okay anymore. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. I mean, I don't know how we produce it. But I like the fact that we are having this conversation, and it's you know, it's not so great. It's not so great to maybe be telling this story in a certain way. That's all I got.
So that so that is the question here as we're getting closer to the hour. Is this a play that we should still be doing so that those conversations can be happening? We talked about Measure for Measure and All's Well, and that terrible rape that happens in Two Gents, and all those, and then Sylvia, who no voice given to her at the end of that, but she ends up getting married and all those type of things. So I'm going to ask the question: should we still be doing this? And if so, how? Is there still relevancy here? Is it okay to ask that direct question? I find it really interesting, Brian, that we've been loaded with questions. We don't know completely what's happening out there on Facebook because of the way this is set up here, but apparently they're having a beautiful conversation over there, but not many questions, which is, I find interesting.
Yeah.
So we're going to have a fabulous talk about this when we get off here.
I mean, do you think this play we should be doing this play? What do you guys think? Now, 2020?
Well, I guess, so I am in a position like Leslie where I am responsible for choosing plays, both at the university and then I'm also choosing seasons for a summer stock company. And I ask myself very deeply, as I know everyone on the screen does, why this play, why now? And so we have to answer those questions freshly for every single play that we choose to produce. For me, so as an artistic director or as a director who would be choosing a show, I don't have a compelling reason. I don't have a new something, a new in on this play personally that would make me choose this play right now. Life is long and things change, and I'm not certainly willing to say throw it away forever and ever. And maybe I will feel differently 5 or 10 or 15 years from now. I mean, my relationship with this play has been 15 years now. 15 years from now, will I have a different answer? Maybe. Right now, I think there are other plays that tell stories that I want to be engaged with right now. I can think of too many other plays that have messages and stories and character arcs, especially for women, that I personally am more interested in investigating.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I would answer it personally. But I do think, I think it's okay to think that. I love Shakespeare. I love that there is the Shakespeare canon, but I'm also not precious about it. I don't feel like we have to, time to finish the canon again, it's come around the horn. I don't feel that way about it. It's not precious to me in that way. It's important to me because of which of the stories in the canon do we choose to tell at what time? How do we tell them? And the voices and the people you cast in them. I will say, when I played Warwick, that was really impactful for me as a theater professional. And I do think I heard from audiences, it was impactful for them to hear that character's story told from a different body than they had heard it told before.
Right.
So that's what I'm interested in as a theater artist today in 2020. But yeah, let's have this conversation in, 10 or 15 years again. And I would love to talk about this play again and say I don't know.
Yeah.
Where are we today on it?
Yeah.
That's how I would answer it anyway.
Leslie?
Well, I agree with Shelly. And for me, not for the festival or for any other Shakespeare festival in the country,
right.
It's a pretty rough sell right now. It's a pretty rough sell because my history with it is skewed. I can remember all the joy and all the fun of it, but the play is the play, and Kate does not speak. She doesn't get to give voice. I mean, this is the thing that we have talked about, and so I don't know how else to do it. However, that's not to say that somebody else with fresh eyes who doesn't have the long history that I have with the play couldn't see something else on the page and maybe bring out a new perspective. But I think when people hear Taming of the Shrew, they expect to come to the theater and they don't expect to feel miserable at the end of it, right? And so I'm not sure how you do it nowadays without paying attention to what's actually there. And maybe people might feel a little betrayed if they came to the theater and they thought, well, I thought this was supposed to be fun, and now I've had this big political statement thrown at me, and I don't like reinforcing this trope about women, or I don't like men being so misogynistic, or whatever it is, that I have to think about this. I mean, everybody's got enough cortisol running through their system right now just because of the state of the world. But I'm really not sure about doing it. I know that if you were going to do it, you need to have I think you want to have a woman directing it. And I think you need to have the trust of the artistic leadership to maybe take the play in a new direction. But I'm very well aware of the fact that the play is 400 years old. And at this point in time, women were property. Come on, let's face it, we still haven't even passed the Equal Rights Amendment in this country. So, and I don't want to reinforce that, but women were property. They had no agency. And the one way that women did have some power in Elizabethan England was to get married, because then you could run your household. And that was it. That was it. So there is an advantage for Kate, if you look at it with Elizabethan eyes, but we're not looking at it with Elizabethan eyes. We are looking at it with 21st century eyes. And I don't know if you can still do this play. It's still like, Shoreless and Cressida, are we going to do that play?
Well, it's like how you conceptually frame the play, I think also really helps establish how the play is going to resonate. Setting the play in a commedia dell'arte, stock characters, and it's all about slapstick, and this whole thing is a whole different thing than going, we're setting it in 2020 right now. That's a totally different production, or setting it in 1930s and Italy, all the things, they all have different avenues in, or what you're going to say by putting it out there. I have to agree with you. It's about timing, and it's also about how you elevate what might be in there, or how you approach putting it there. Because there are a lot of these plays that are like that. It isn't just Shrew. There are these plays. It's one of the things I find really fascinating about the work is like, none of these characters are perfect. And I also think he's also written other plays better that explore some of this theme work. I always link the two of these plays, Much Ado and Shrew, are sort of like, well, he got it right with Much Ado, where he made Beatrice, who's like speaking her mind, and she's strong, and there's this thing that is about two equal people sort of bantering back and forth, and inside that there's an understanding of one another that they're just kind of holding on to. And he's really given Beatrice a lot more agency, I find, than Kate and how that's written. So I sort of look at that as the writer going, oh, he was able to thread that a little bit stronger, I think. But then I go, but there are even things in that, you know what I mean? Where I'm like, well, you got Claudio, you got Hero, you got this whole other plot in this play where you're like, well, what's going on with this relationship? The trust level, it's one of the things that's actually really quite interesting about these plays to me, because they're not perfect. And I think in many ways, sometimes we present them and people expect this thing about going, oh, I'm going to go watch how I should view my thinking. I need to be like that.
Oh, Victorian.
A lot of times you go, look at that and look at how you don't want to do that. You do not want to be those people. And sometimes as actors, that's like the really exciting stuff to do, because you're like, okay, how can I solve this? But in some ways you have to embrace the flaws. You have to kind of go, no, that's a shitty person.
Well, that's the play. Just, you have to do the play.
Yeah.
But I think in our 21st century sensibilities, one of the ways that it's not just Shrew, but it's the whole canon and the representation of women, is that we are working, so many festivals now are working to give women, female actors, equal airtime. We're casting them in roles that are for men, because, it's hard to go to the Shakespeare Festival and the room's got 40 people in it and 5 of them are women.
Yeah.
And, I've been in plays where I was one of 2 women at the festival. And it's so to give some equal airtime, to just open that up, to let that breathe, helps us. And I just think it expands our minds a little bit. And I think that what we're doing right now to give women some more time on the Shakespearean stage helps us with regard to these plays that are problematic.
Yeah. Cool. Shelly, do you have any final words on Shrew or what we've been discussing here? And then I'll turn the time to Leslie for any final things you want to say.
No, I don't think so. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and it's great to talk to another Kate. Leslie and I have known each other for years and years, and we're friends, and we talk about all kinds of things, but she and I have never actually, that I know, we actually talked about Kate. So it's been great. It's been a great week for me to revisit my thoughts about this play in preparation for this morning. It's been great to connect with Leslie about that. So I've really appreciated it. I would say that if I just had a final thought, what's new to me right now is just what Leslie just said about, we as theater makers are at a crucial time about inclusivity in our spaces, right? And so how do we acknowledge that we're talking about a white European male, and how can we embrace that as a vehicle to be universal in our exploration of these stories, and that expanding our notion of who we employ to embody the words on the stage is going to be crucial as we move forward. And that is, that's what gives me hope. I mean, that's our way through. When people ask me, why do we even do Shakespeare anymore? And I'm dealing with this in my own curriculum in my university. Yeah. And I have to think deeply about it. I do think it's important. It cannot be the end-all be-all of the way that we understand Western theater. And it certainly cannot only be told, in my opinion, by the genders or the races that Shakespeare would have thought. And if we move forward in that collective spirit about broadening our sense of who tells these stories, broadening our sense of, which actors, which bodies we put on the stages, then I'm hopeful about the way through, certainly, for the whole canon. And maybe Shrew again someday, maybe?
Cool.
Yeah, Leslie? I mean, it does charge, I know we're out of time, but the writers of now, that's the thing that gives me great encouragement and hope for the industry, is like, no, well, the contemporary voices that are writing about our current collective world are really the important charge going forward. We use these plays as classical plays, and sometimes I find to look at them and kind of go, do they measure up, and what are the things? So some things work and many don't, but you're absolutely right, where it's like, no, you have to either look at them through a new lens, under a new microscope, if you're going to do that. And also charge this idea of putting new plays out there that are about all of the things right now that were never a part of some of this canon that we've had in previous iterations, where it's like, no, we need to talk about how we're living now. That's how we're living now. And so that's a great comment, I think, Shelly, on that. And obviously the woes of running a Shakespeare Festival, where your theater is named after this playwright.
But Leslie, any final words there?
Well, I just want to reinforce what Brian and Shelly have just said, that, we will continue to investigate Shakespeare with our 21st century eyes. But the great thing about the Shakespeare Festival is that they don't, most Shakespeare festivals aren't producing just Shakespeare. And so we can hold up Shakespeare and these other plays and and actually just have a dialogue between the titles that are selected for the season. And that's what really gives us agency going forward, with regard to being able to investigate these older plays and then put them up against new plays. I mean, come on, even Ibsen's Doll's House is so revolutionary, and and that play is 150 years old, right? But it's but if you had Shrew and Doll's House up against each other in a season, and then something even more, that's absolutely right now, it's a great spot for dialogue. It's a great spot for provoking ourselves to think about our, to investigate our assumptions about the world and our role in it.
Wonderful. Thank you for providing this dialogue. We appreciate that conversation. Brian, do you have any final words before I do a quick closure?
No, thank you. I mean, I feel like we could talk all day, on this and so many things, which is all part of this whole idea of getting inside this stuff, not necessarily having the answers, but also just
being willing to listen.
The ideas around it, which I think is really vital in what we do. And I'm very grateful for you taking the time and both of your stewardship for the form and for the work, which I know both of you is in academia also, like forwarding that collective thinking is really, really vital to our humanity. So thank you for that. And
thank you.
We'll see when the next time we produce Shrew is. I don't know. It might be 25 years from now.
You can still have this conversation online. We are live on Facebook. A recording of this is going to be put on YouTube. You'll be able to find it on our website, bard.org, down on the virtual Shakespeare Festival link. And we would encourage those conversations to happen. Tomorrow, join us for our production seminar where we're going to have a repertory magic. So at 1 o'clock, join us, and Ben Holman and Dan Giedemann are going to be talking you through how that changeover works. And we're grateful that you're joining us for these things. So thank you very, very much. Thank you, Shelly. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Brian. And we will see you all tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.